I want you to sit with me for a moment, as if we are two old friends sharing a quiet evening together. In my hand, I hold something that may not seem like much to most, a stack of letters worn thin by time, tied together with string that has frayed almost as much as my own memory. But to me, these letters are my life. They are my youth, my fears, my hopes, and my reminders of what it meant to live through a time when the world felt like it was falling apart, and yet somehow we found a way to hold it together. This first letter, I remember writing it as though it were only yesterday. The paper was rough, the ink sometimes smudged, my handwriting uneven from the rattle of the train. But every word I wrote with a trembling hand and a steady heart. I was young then, younger than you might imagine, and as I looked out of that train window, I wondered if those words would ever reach home, if they would ever be read by the people I loved most. Dearest family, I wrote, tonight the stars feel closer than they ever did back home. Perhaps because I know you are looking at the same sky. This journey is just beginning, and though I do not yet know what lies ahead, I carry you with me in every step I take. Do you feel that? That pull of the heart across miles, across uncertainty? When I wrote those words, I did not know if I would survive the war. I did not know if the letter itself would make it through, but I knew this. If those words reached my family, they would know I was thinking of them. That is what kept me alive in ways I cannot fully explain. You see, a letter is not just ink on paper. It is a voice, carried across distance and time. When you hold it in your hands, you do not just read the words, you hear the heart that wrote them. The paper itself carries the weight of waiting, of patience, of longing. And when you open it, you are opening a piece of someone's soul. The first time I read those words again, decades later, my own handwriting startled me. I barely recognized it. It was not the hand of an old man. It was the hand of a boy, trembling, unsure, yet reaching for something greater. And in those shaky lines I could hear the voice of who I once was, the fear, the hope, the courage I did not even know I had. I told my family in that letter, the train leaves at dawn. I tried to sleep, but my mind wanders. I hear the whistle in my dreams already. If these words find you, know that I am strong and that my courage comes from you. Looking back, I realized that courage was never truly mine. It was borrowed from the love I carried in my heart, borrowed from the memory of my mother's smile, my father's quiet strength, my brother's laughter, my sweetheart's gentle words. Courage is never a solitary thing. It is a gift, passed from one soul to another. Perhaps that is why I feel compelled to share these letters with you now, because courage is not something meant to be hoarded. It is something meant to be given, to be remembered, to be carried forward. And if my words can encourage even one heart today, then perhaps they have done their work twice, once in 1942 and once again now, in your hands, in your ears, in your life. I must confess, the boots they gave me that first week felt impossibly heavy. The uniform scratched against my skin. The drills were endless, and my muscles ached in ways I had never known before. But every morning, I remembered the people waiting back home, and that thought was my strength. I wrote it plainly without flourish. Each morning, I remember your faces. That thought is my salvation. Even now I smile when I read that line. Salvation does not always come with trumpets or miracles. Sometimes it comes quietly in the form of memory, in the steady image of the ones we love most. You may think these are simple words. Perhaps they are. But the truth is, the simplest words often carry the most power. A boy writing to his family, confessing his doubt, admitting his weakness, holding fast to love. That is the story of strength. It is not found in medals nor in grand speeches, but in the ordinary courage of continuing on, one day at a time. As I wrote more letters, I began to realize they were not only messages to my family, they were prayers written in ink. Each letter carried my heart across the ocean. Each letter whispered, "I am still here. I am still alive, and I am still holding on to hope." One night, in a cold barracks, I scribbled these words under the flicker of a lantern. "There is talk of where we may be sent, though nothing is certain. I do not fear the destination as much as the distance. For each mile I travel, I wonder, will my words still reach you? Will you still hear me even when I am far away?" That was the question that haunted me most. Not whether I would live or die, but whether my voice would still be heard. For what is a man if his words do not reach the people who love him? Perhaps you have felt this too. Perhaps you have sent out words, whether spoken, written, or simply prayed, and wondered if they would ever be received. And perhaps, like me, you have discovered that faith is not in the guarantee of an answer, but in the courage to send those words anyway. Today, we live in a world where messages can cross continents in seconds. But in those days, a letter could take weeks, even months, to arrive, and still we wrote them. Still, we trusted that love was strong enough to survive the silence. If there is a lesson in that, it is this: true love, true faith, true courage always endure the waiting. I remember writing one of the most important lines of my life in that first letter. If one day this letter is all that remains of me, let it tell you this: courage is not found on battlefields. It is found in the heart, in the small choices. In every moment we choose love over fear. I do not know what possessed me to write such words as a young man. At that age, we are often too busy proving ourselves to admit such truths. And yet, when I read it now, I realize that the boy who wrote it understood something that the man only learned later: that the greatest battles we fight are not with weapons, but with choices. And so, I share this with you now, as an old man who has seen much and lived long. Courage is not the absence of fear. No, my friend, courage is walking forward with fear in your pocket, love in your heart, and hope lighting your path. That is the lesson of my first letter, and that is the lesson I pass on to you. I want you to imagine for a moment the young man I was, sitting on that rattling train, clutching a pencil, writing by the dim light of a lantern. Imagine the smell of ink and sweat, the sound of boots on wooden floors, the uncertainty of tomorrow. And then imagine those words, fragile, imperfect, trembling, crossing oceans, carried by ships and trains, tucked into sacks of mail, finally reaching a small home thousands of miles away. Imagine the hands that opened that envelope, the eyes that read those lines, the hearts that felt a little less alone because of them. That is why letters matter. That is why words matter. Because they have the power to bridge distance, to carry love across silence, to remind us that no matter how far apart we may be, we are still connected. So here I am, decades later, reading those same words aloud again. My voice may be older, my hands more wrinkled, but the truth remains unchanged. We endure not because life is easy, but because love is strong. We survive not because fear disappears, but because hope refuses to die. This, my friend, is where our journey begins. With a single letter written by a trembling hand on a dark night, carrying the light of hope across time. And as I share the rest of these letters with you, I ask only one thing. Listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. For within these words are not only the story of a soldier, but the story of what it means to be human. Before there was war, there was life. And oh, how sweet that life was. You know, when I look back on my youth, it feels almost like another country, so different from the world we know today. The air seemed cleaner, the nights darker and filled with stars, the days slower but full of meaning. We had no idea what waited on the horizon, but perhaps that is the gift of youth. You live in the moment, not yet aware of how fragile those moments truly are. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everybody knew your name, and the sound of the church bells marked the rhythm of life. Mornings were filled with the smell of bread from the bakery, afternoons with the laughter of children running barefoot down dusty roads, and evenings with families gathered on porches, swapping stories as the fireflies danced in the summer air. It was a world simple in its needs, but rich in its spirit. As a boy, I had my share of dreams. I wanted to see the world, to carve out my own story, and yet I was also content in the small joys that surrounded me. My father worked hard, his hands roughened by years of labor, but his eyes were kind, and his words carried the kind of wisdom that lingers long after they're spoken. My mother, she had a gift for love. She could take scraps of fabric and make them into something beautiful. She could take a simple meal and turn it into a feast, and she could take a worried heart and soothe it with nothing more than a gentle touch. From them, I learned what true wealth is. It isn't money nor possessions, but the strength of character and the depth of love we share with those around us. I remember one summer afternoon, long before the war touched our lives, sitting with my father under the old oak tree behind our house. He leaned back, chewing on a piece of straw, and said to me, "Son, the world will ask many things of you, but never forget. The measure of a man is not in what he takes, but in what he gives." At the time, I only nodded, not fully understanding. But those words would return to me many times, especially in the darkest days ahead. Perhaps you too have words like that, lessons given to you when you were young that seemed small at the time, but later became anchors for your soul. Of course, youth is not all lessons and wisdom. It is laughter and mischief and discovery. I spent many days running wild with my brothers, playing ball in empty fields, daring each other to climb higher, run faster, dream bigger. We had no devices, no screens, no endless distractions. Our games were simple, but they filled our hearts with joy. We found magic in the ordinary, skipping stones across the river, chasing shadows in the twilight, lying in the grass and telling each other what shapes we saw in the clouds. Sometimes I think that's what the modern world has lost, the ability to find wonder in the small things. And then there was love. I was young, barely more than a boy, when I first felt the quickening of the heart that comes when you see someone who changes your world with just a smile. She was not the first girl I had ever noticed, but she was the first who made me believe in forever. Her laughter was like music, her eyes like windows to a home I had never known, but always longed for. I would walk her home after church, my heart pounding with every step, rehearsing words in my mind that never quite came out right. We would sit on her porch in the evenings, talking about nothing and everything, dreams of travel, books we had read, the color of the sunset. And though I was young, I knew in my bones that her presence was a gift I could not measure. It was in those tender moments that I learned something that would carry me through the hardest days of war. Love is not a distraction from life. It is the very reason for it. When you carry someone's love in your heart, you can endure almost anything. That truth became my shield in the trenches, my light in the darkest nights. But let me not paint the picture too perfect. Life, even then, was not without hardship. Money was scarce, work was hard, and the future was uncertain in its own way. The Great Depression had left scars on every household, and though we tried to move forward, the weight of those years still lingered. Yet, in a strange way, those struggles made us stronger. We learned to share, to help neighbors, to live with less, but give more. And perhaps that is what prepared us, unknowingly, for the trials that would soon come. One of my last letters before I left for the war captured this feeling. I wrote, "I think often of home, not just the walls and the roof, but the warmth inside. I think of how we lived through lean years, how we laughed even when the cupboards were nearly bare. If hardship could not break us, then perhaps nothing ever truly can." When I read those words today, I realize how much truth they hold, even now. For every generation faces its storms, and every storm is met not with despair, but with the quiet resilience of ordinary people who choose to keep going. Do you see the beauty in that? The wisdom of youth is not in what it knows, but in what it feels. And my youth was filled with feelings that became lessons: gratitude for small joys, respect for hard work, reverence for family, and a belief that love is the most powerful force we will ever encounter. As I sit here, an old man with years far behind me, I realize that the world today moves too quickly. We rush from one thing to another, always chasing, rarely pausing. But youth, in my time, was slower, quieter, perhaps humbler. And in that slowness, we discovered truths that remain with me still, that life's meaning is not found in the noise, but in the silence, not in abundance, but in gratitude, not in grand achievements, but in the simple act of loving and being loved. If I could offer you one gift from my youth, it would be this. Remember to notice the small things: the laughter of a child, the smell of bread baking, the warmth of the sun on your face, the sound of a loved one calling your name. These are the treasures that no war, no hardship, no passage of time can ever take away. So when I think of my life before the war, I do not think of what I lacked, but of what I had. A home filled with love, friends who made me laugh until my sides hurt, a girl whose smile carried me through storms I had not yet faced, a family whose lessons became the foundation of my soul. That was my youth. And though the war would soon take me far from it, the truth is I never truly left it behind. For those memories became my armor, and those dreams became my compass, guiding me through every letter, every march, every long and weary night. And perhaps that is the lesson I wish to leave with you now. Never underestimate the power of your beginnings. The world may change, life may throw storms upon you, but the roots of your youth, the values, the dreams, the love you carry, will sustain you if you let them. They sustained me, And even now, as I hold these letters in my hands, they remind me that the boy I was before the war is still here, whispering across time. Life is precious, love is stronger than fear, and even the smallest dreams can carry you through the darkest days. I still remember the day the letter came, as if it were yesterday. I was at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. My mother was tending to the bread in the oven, and the air smelled of warmth, comfort, and everything I would soon have to leave behind. Then came the sound of footsteps on the porch and a sharp knock at a door. The postman stood there with an envelope in his hand, an envelope that felt heavier than any paper I had ever touched. The world seemed to grow quiet when I opened it. It was my call to duty. The nation needed me. I was to report for service. I can tell you, son, in that moment my heart was torn in two, one half swelling with pride, the other heavy with fear. It is difficult to explain what it feels like to be called to war unless you've lived through it. It's not like being summoned to school or being asked to work extra hours. It is a calling that pierces into your very soul. Part of me felt honored. My father had fought in the Great War, and his stories lingered in our household like old songs played on the radio. I thought perhaps this was my chance to follow in his footsteps, to prove my own courage. Yet another part of me, the part that loved the smell of fresh grass on summer mornings, the laughter of my brothers in the barn, the soft voice of my mother humming hymns in the evening, well, that part wanted desperately to stay. Duty has a way of pulling you forward even as your heart clings to home. The days after that letter were some of the most tender and heartbreaking of my life. Every ordinary task seemed suddenly extraordinary. Each morning I woke up, I looked longer at the wallpaper in my room, at the way the sunlight danced across the floorboards. Each meal tasted richer, as though my mother's stew carried within it the very soul of our family. I took walks down the road I had known since boyhood, touching the old oak tree where I had carved my initials as a lad. I whispered a promise to it, silly as that might sound, that I would return. Saying goodbye was not one moment, but many little ones stretched across those days. And when I hugged my mother goodbye, I felt her tears dampen my shirt, and I understood something for the first time. Leaving is not hard because of fear of the unknown, but because of love for what you leave behind. Before I left, my father sat me down in the old rocking chair on the porch. He looked at me with those steady eyes of his, eyes that had seen trenches, mud, and the loss of good men. He didn't speak much about the horrors of his own war. That was not his way. But he did speak of courage. Son, he said, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about stepping forward even when your knees are shaking. Those words sank deep into me, deeper than any sermon I ever heard. They became the lantern I carried with me through dark times. And now, as an old man myself, I can tell you, he was right. Courage is not a loud shout. It is often a quiet step forward when everything inside you begs to turn back. The train station was crowded the morning I left. Young men in their best jackets stood alongside families holding handkerchiefs and half-broken smiles. The sound of steam engines filled the air, mixed with the murmur of farewells. I clutched my suitcase, packed with a few clothes, a Bible, and a photograph of my family. When the train whistle blew, I kissed my mother on the cheek, shook my father's hand, though his eyes said more than his words ever could, and promised my younger siblings I would write as often as I could. The train pulled away, and with each turn of the wheels, I felt my boyhood slipping behind me. That moment, more than any other, was when I became a man. Arriving at the training camp was like stepping into another world. Rows of bunks, the smell of leather boots and canvas, the bark of orders cutting through the air. Suddenly, I was not just John from the small town. I was a soldier among hundreds, each of us carrying our own fears, dreams, and memories. At night, lying in the barracks, I would hear the quiet sobs of men who missed their wives, their children, or simply the warmth of home. And yet, in those moments of shared sorrow, we became brothers. War has a strange way of binding strangers tighter than kin. One evening, after a long day of drills, I sat down to write my first letter home. My hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from the weight of knowing those words would carry a piece of me back to my family. I wrote, "Dearest Mother and Father, I am safe, though tired. I carry your love with me like armor. I promise to make you proud." Even now, decades later, I can see the ink smudges on that page, a testament to the boy I was, trying to sound braver than he felt. Letters, I would come to realize, are not just paper. They are bridges that keep love alive across oceans and battlefields. As training wore on, we were taught discipline, endurance, and precision. But more than the drills, what weighed on me most was the realization that I was now part of something larger than myself. I wasn't just carrying a rifle. I was carrying the trust of my family, the faith of my town, and the hopes of a country fighting to remain free. That realization was both a burden and a gift. It kept me from despair when days grew long and the world seemed uncertain. To this day, I believe each of us carries responsibilities greater than ourselves, whether to family, community, or faith. Duty, though heavy, gives life meaning. There were nights in camp when fear gripped me. Fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of failing the men beside me. I remember lying awake, staring at the wooden beams above my bunk and whispering prayers into the darkness. In those prayers, I discovered something important. Fear is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a companion to be understood. It walks beside us, reminding us of what we cherish. And in learning to walk with it, we learn strength. Eventually, the day came when training ended, and we were told we would soon be shipped overseas. The weight of that truth pressed upon us all. Yet, as we lined up in formation, something had changed in me. I was no longer just a boy clutching a letter. I was a soldier, ready to serve, ready to endure, ready to hope. I thought back to my father's words about courage, and I felt them steadying my steps. As we marched forward, I whispered silently to myself, I will carry their love. I will carry their hope. And no matter what comes, I will not let fear be the final word. The sea was endless, stretching farther than my eyes could see. The ship rocked beneath us, and each creak of its steel ribs reminded us how far we were leaving home behind. At night, I would stand on the deck, clutching the rail, the cold spray of the ocean on my face. The stars above were brilliant, but they felt so far away, like home itself. I wrote to my mother one night, the sea seems to go on forever, but I keep telling myself, beyond this water lies the duty I must face. Beyond this sea lies the man I must become. In those quiet hours, surrounded by other young men just as frightened as I was, I realized that courage is often born not in battle, but in the waiting before it. When we arrived, the land looked nothing like the green fields I had left behind. The towns were scarred, houses reduced to rubble, roads broken and scarred with holes. Children stared at us with eyes too old for their faces. It struck me then, war is not only about soldiers, but about the innocent caught between forces they never chose. That image stayed with me, a reminder that what we fought for was not glory, but the hope that one day no child would have to carry such heavy eyes again. Our first march toward the front was heavy with silence, boots crunching dirt, rifles at our sides, hearts pounding in unison. I tried to memorize the faces of the men around me because I feared I might not see them again. There is a bond that forms when you march toward danger together. It is not spoken in words, but felt in glances, in the way one man adjusts his pack to ease another's burden. We became brothers in those steps, long before the first bullet ever flew. The first battle is something you never forget. The air explodes, the ground shakes, and suddenly the world is louder than you thought possible. I remember the whistle of shells overhead, the sharp cracks of rifles, and the smell, a mix of gunpowder, earth, and fear. My hands trembled as I fired my weapon, not at a target on a practice field, but at men who looked as young and frightened as me. It was then I understood war is not about hatred. Most of the time, it's about survival. That night, huddled in a foxhole with mud creeping into my boots, I tore a page from my notebook and wrote home by the dim glow of a lantern. Dearest family, today I faced what I feared most. And though I shook with every sound, I did not run. I thought of you, and it steadied me. If fear is a shadow, then love is the flame that keeps it from swallowing us whole. That letter, written with dirt on my hands and tears on my face, became one of the truest things I ever wrote. The morning after our first engagement, we walked the field. Some men did not rise to march again. Their silence was the loudest thing I ever heard. I bent down to pick up the helmet of a boy who could not have been more than 19. In that moment, the weight of war pressed heavy on me. I whispered a prayer for him and for his mother, who would soon receive a letter of her own, though not the kind she longed for. I tell you, son, nothing makes you cherish life more than walking among those who will never see another sunrise. If the battlefield takes, it also gives. It gave me brothers who stood beside me when the world shook. There was Thomas, who cracked jokes even as bullets whizzed past, reminding us that laughter could still exist in the darkest places. There was James, who shared his last piece of bread with me when rations ran thin. These men, once strangers, became part of my very soul. And that is one of war's strange gifts. It forges bonds deeper than time itself. Many people believe that soldiers grow fearless. That is not true. We carried fear with us every step, like a pack slung across our shoulders, but fear did not master us. Instead, it taught us vigilance, humility, and trust in one another. I remember whispering to myself in the foxhole, I am afraid, but I am not alone. That lesson I carried beyond the battlefield into every season of my life. Even now, when I sit in this old chair, I know that fear still visits, but it no longer rules me. Not all moments in battle were about destruction. Once, during a lull in fighting, I saw a young enemy soldier crawling across the field, wounded. He was no older than my youngest brother. I gave him water from my canteen. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment there were no sides, no uniforms, just two young men who wanted to live. That taught me something that has stayed with me all my days. Beneath the banners of nations, we are all human, all fragile, all searching for home. When the smoke cleared after those first encounters, I found myself changed. I was no longer the boy who had kissed his mother goodbye at the train station. I was no longer the dreamer standing on the porch talking about tomorrow. I had walked into fire and returned, scarred, yes, but alive. And with life came responsibility. To remember, to honor, and to carry forward the lessons of sacrifice, courage, and love. I wrote one last letter before we moved again. Family, I have faced the storm, and I am still standing. Whatever lies ahead, know this: the light of your love carried me through. If I can hold on to that, then no darkness can ever truly win. If you've never fought a war, it may be hard to understand the word brotherhood. Out there in the mud and cold, men became more than friends. They became a part of you, as vital as the air you breathed. We shared everything: food, blankets, laughter, and fear. A crust of bread cut in half tasted better than a feast when it was given by a brother at your side. We weren't bound by blood, but by fire. And that bond was stronger than steel. It was the smallest things that tied us together. A cigarette passed around in silence after a long march. A joke whispered during inspection that made us stifle our laughter while the sergeant's back was turned. The way one man would hum a hymn in the darkness, and before long, half the platoon would quietly join in. These small things became lifelines. They reminded us that beyond the uniforms, we were still sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. We were still human. Among those men, there was one I grew especially close to. His name was Daniel. He came from a small farm town not far from mine, and maybe that's why we understood each other. Daniel had a smile that could chase away even the darkest clouds. He carried a photograph of his wife and little girl in his breast pocket, and every night before sleep he'd look at it, touch it gently, and whisper a prayer. He reminded me of what we were really fighting for, not medals or glory, but for the chance that little girls could grow up free, that wives could keep their husbands, that life could go on. Daniel and I often wrote letters home side by side. I'd write to my parents, and he to his wife. Sometimes, when the words wouldn't come, he'd ask me for help. "How do I tell her I'm scared without making her worry?" he once asked. I smiled and said, "Tell her you think of her every day, and that her love makes you stronger. That's all she needs to know." He nodded, wiped his eyes, and began again. I learned that letters are not just ink on paper. They are lifelines stretched across oceans, keeping hearts beating in time. In every unit, there's an unspoken pact. We look out for each other. We don't need to say it. It's written in the way we pass a canteen, the way we throw ourselves flat to cover a friend, the way we share laughter in the face of fear. Daniel and I made such a pact, though we never spoke it. I knew if danger came, he'd be there for me and I for him. That trust was as sure as the ground under our boots. War has a cruel habit of stealing what you love most in the quietest ways. One morning, as we moved through a ruined village, the sound of gunfire tore through the air. It happened so fast. One moment Daniel was walking beside me, the next he was on the ground. I dropped to my knees, calling his name. My hands pressed desperately against the wound. His eyes looked up at me, wide and frightened, and he whispered, "Tell them I love them." Then the light faded from his face. In that instant, the world grew colder than I thought possible. That night, I tried to write a letter to Daniel's wife. My hands trembled. My tears smudged the ink. How could I tell her that the man who had loved her so deeply, who had dreamed of coming home to hold his little girl, would never return? I wrote, "He spoke your names with love until the very end. He was brave, he was kind, and he was my brother." To this day, writing that letter remains one of the hardest things I have ever done. When we buried Daniel, the entire platoon stood in silence. No preacher, no church bells, just the sound of the wind carrying our sorrow. Each of us carried grief differently. Some grew quiet, others angry. Some tried to laugh louder than before, as if to chase away the shadow. But one thing united us, the determination that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Grief, when shared among brothers, does not crush. It steels you. It teaches you to fight not for yourself, but for the man beside you. Loss is a brutal teacher, but it teaches well. From Daniel's death, I learned that life is fragile beyond measure, and that every word spoken, every touch given, every moment shared is a gift. I came to understand something that has stayed with me all my years. Don't wait to tell people you love them. Don't wait to forgive. Don't wait to live, because one day there may be no tomorrow. Even as we move forward through more towns and more battles, I carried Daniel with me, and not just him, but every man we lost along the way. They live in me still, in the stories I tell, in the values I hold, in the quiet moments when I close my eyes and see their faces. That is the strange blessing of brotherhood. Though loss breaks your heart, it also binds you forever to those you loved. And when I speak to you now, sitting in this chair as an old man, I can tell you this. My life has been richer because of the brothers I found, and deeper because of the losses I endured. When people ask me what kept us going during those long and brutal months, my answer is simple. Letters. Not the food rations, not the orders barked by officers, not even the victories we counted here and there. It was the letters that saved us. A thin piece of paper carried across seas and battle lines could lift a man's spirit higher than a victory parade. A single page of ink held more power than any weapon, for it reminded us we were still human, still loved, still tethered to life beyond the battlefield. You should have seen the look on a soldier's face when mail was called. Hardened men, covered in mud, would stand straighter, their eyes hungry like children waiting for candy, and when a name was shouted and an envelope pressed into a trembling hand, the war paused for just a moment. I remember holding letters from home and feeling my heart beat faster, as if the very paper carried warmth from my family's kitchen. The smell of gunpowder vanished, replaced by the scent of memory. I still have a copy of the first letter I wrote during those early months. It went something like this. Dearest Mother and Father, the days are long and heavy, but when I think of home, I find strength. The nights are the hardest, but I picture our porch, the fields back home, and your faces, and suddenly the war feels far away. If love could be measured, It would weigh heavier than my rifle, and that is what carries me through. When I sealed that envelope, I felt as though I was sending a piece of my soul across the ocean. And when I received their reply weeks later, I cried quietly under my blanket. Their words reminded me I was still their son, not just a soldier. People imagine soldiers writing grand speeches in their letters, but the truth is, it was the simple words that mattered most. I miss your bread. How is the dog? Don't forget to wear your scarf when it's cold. Those plain words were poetry to us. They reminded us that normal life still existed somewhere, that fields were still being plowed, that children still played, that the world still turned, and that maybe, if we were lucky, we'd return to it someday. Not every man found the words easily. Some of my brothers struggled to write. I remember one night, Thomas, who was brave on the battlefield but shy with a pen, asked me to help him write to his fiancée. Together we wrote, "My darling, though the guns thunder around me, it is your voice I hear in my heart. When I am afraid, I picture your smile, and it gives me courage. I fight so one day I may walk beside you again, free and whole." He sealed it with trembling hands, and I thought to myself, love gives even the quietest man a loud voice. But not every man received letters. Some waited in vain, their names never called on mail day. I saw the way their shoulders slumped, the way they tried to hide disappointment behind a grin. That silence was the cruelest weapon of all. It was then I learned something important. Never underestimate the power of words. A letter might seem small, but to a man at war, it is life itself. And silence, oh, silence can wound deeper than any bullet. One night, after a particularly brutal day, I wrote by candlelight in the corner of a ruined farmhouse. My hands were dirty, my body exhausted, but my heart needed to speak. Dearest family, today I saw both the worst and the best of men. I saw destruction, but I also saw kindness. I saw fear, but I also saw courage. Know that I carry your love like a shield, and if tomorrow never comes, let it be known that I thought of you in my final breath. Writing those words was like breathing again after being underwater too long. The more I wrote, the more I realized letters were more than communication. They were lessons. Each word forced me to pause and reflect, to pull meaning from the chaos around me. Letters taught me gratitude, because you had to notice the small blessings to write them down. They taught me patience, because weeks passed before replies came. And they taught me honesty, because in war there is no time for falsehood. Letters became my diary of wisdom, one envelope at a time. Though many think of love letters as romantic, the truth is love came in many forms. Love from my parents, steady and grounding. Love from my siblings, playful even in their worry. Love from friends back home, reminding me that the town still remembered me. Each letter was love dressed in different clothes, but all of it wrapped around me like a blanket. And yes, some men received letters from sweethearts, filled with longing and promises of futures together. Those were treasures beyond measure. One soldier I knew carried his fiancée's letter folded in his helmet liner, so it rested against his head every time he went to battle. That's the kind of power words had. They became armor. As I sit here now, an old man, I sometimes take out those faded envelopes. The paper is yellowed, the ink faded, but the love inside them has not dimmed. When I read them, I hear the voices of my parents, the laughter of my siblings, even the quiet prayers of friends long gone. Those letters are proof that even in the darkest chapters of history, love can burn brighter than hate. If there is one lesson I want you to carry, it is this: never underestimate the power of a simple word, a written thought, a shared piece of your heart. For in the end, words can outlast war, outshine darkness, and outlive even death. When I close my eyes, I can still hear the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the endless rhythm of leather soles pressing against mud, snow, and stone. We marched for miles that turned into days, and days that turned into weeks. There was no end in sight, only the promise that each step would carry us closer to something: victory, survival, or perhaps just another horizon. The road was not just a path of dirt and gravel. It became a test of will. Every aching muscle, every blister that tore open on our feet, whispered to us that war was as much endured as it was fought. Our packs were heavy, not just with gear, but with the burden of our hopes. Inside those packs, we carried letters from home, photographs, folded and refolded, till the edges wore thin, and small tokens of normal life: a scarf, a rosary, a book of prayers. The rifle slung across my shoulder grew heavier with each mile, not because the steel changed weight, but because my spirit grew weary. Yet we carried it all because laying it down was not an option. To march was to survive, and to survive was to keep going for those who depended on us. During those marches, silence was often louder than words. Men walked side by side, their breaths forming clouds in the cold, their eyes focused on the ground ahead. Sometimes you didn't need words to feel the closeness of a brother beside you: a glance, a nod, a shared grimace when the mud pulled at your boots. Those became conversations of their own. There was comfort in knowing that no one walked alone, even when the road seemed endless. Food became a memory more than a reality. There were days when our rations were no more than a hard biscuit and a sip of water, yet we marched on. Hunger was not just a physical ache, it was a teacher. It taught me patience, it taught me gratitude, and it taught me that even a crumb of bread could feel like a feast when shared among friends. In those moments I realized that hardship reveals the true measure of a man, not in how much he receives, but in how much he is willing to give. The sky could be as cruel as any army. Rain poured into our uniforms until they clung to our skin like ice. Snow buried our tracks and froze our fingers until they barely obeyed. Heat baked the ground beneath us, turning each step into fire. We learned quickly that nature does not take sides. It humbles everyone the same, but enduring the elements built in us a quiet resilience. We could not command the storm, but we could command ourselves, and that was enough. When night came, we did not rest in soft beds. We lay on the hard earth, sometimes under the stars, sometimes under nothing at all. The ground became our mattress, the sky our blanket. I remember staring at constellations, wondering if the same stars shone above my family back home. That thought alone warmed me more than any fire could. Sleep came in fragments, broken by distant artillery or the cold seeping into our bones. But even then, we held on to the small comfort of knowing dawn would come, and with it, another chance to keep moving. Even during the marches, I sometimes pulled out a letter in the dim glow of a lantern. I read words from your grandmother, her handwriting softening the roughness of war. "Keep walking," she once wrote, "because every step you take is a step back to me." Those words became my anchor. In the darkest stretches, I repeated them silently, as if they were a prayer, and truly they were. It was not my legs alone that carried me through those marches. It was the men beside me. When one stumbled, another reached out. When someone lagged, the group slowed to match his pace. Brotherhood was not declared in speeches. It was built in sweat, in sacrifice, and in the silent promise that no man would be left behind. Those bonds gave us a strength greater than any uniform or weapon. Sometimes the hardest part of those marches was not the hunger nor the fatigue, but the silence of loss. A man who marched beside you one day might be gone the next, his place empty, his boots never to strike the earth again, and yet the column moved forward, as it always did. That silence was deafening, and it taught me that life is both fragile and sacred. Every step we take in this world is borrowed, and every breath is a gift. What I learned on those long roads was that endurance is not just the act of surviving. It is the act of carrying your spirit through trial without letting it break. The body can falter, but the spirit, the spirit, must remain upright. That is the wisdom I wish to pass to you. When life feels like an endless march, remember that each step forward, no matter how small, is victory in itself. Even on the harshest days, we held on to hope. Sometimes it was the simple hope of reaching a village with fresh water or a camp with a warm fire. Sometimes it was the greater hope of someday returning home. Hope was the light that no storm could extinguish, and without it, we would have been lost. I tell you now, never let hope leave your heart. Even when the road is long and the night is cold, hope is the flame that will carry you through. Looking back, I see those marches not as punishments, but as lessons. They taught me the value of perseverance, the gift of brotherhood, and the power of hope. The road may have been hard, but it shaped me into the man I became, the husband, the father, the grandfather speaking to you now. Hardship, I learned, is not the end of us. It is the fire that forges us. Every great struggle carries within it a moment where the tide begins to change. For us, it was not a single trumpet blast or a banner raised high. It was quieter, almost imperceptible at first. I remember walking through a battered village, the smoke still clinging to the chimneys, and for the first time I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, the war would not last forever. There was a shift in the air, a subtle strength building within us. The men marched with a new kind of determination, the kind born not just of survival, but of belief that the end was possible. It was during those days that the letters from home changed in tone. In the beginning, they had been filled with fear and longing. Stay safe. Come home soon. We miss you terribly. But now they began to carry words of cautious hope. Your grandmother wrote of victory rumors whispered in the streets, of neighbors who held on to faith even as rations grew smaller. She wrote, "The world feels heavy, but I believe it will soon feel light again." Her hope became my hope. Every word she penned was like a hand pulling me upward from despair. We fought battles that marked true turning points, moments when the enemy, who had once seemed invincible, began to falter. I will never forget one particular morning when the fog lifted from the fields and revealed their retreat. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Victory was not yet ours, but for the first time, defeat was not inevitable. That morning, as I lifted my rifle with trembling hands, I thought, perhaps I will live to see peace again. But the turning points were not always grand. Sometimes they were hidden in small acts of courage. A soldier who carried a wounded comrade for miles without rest. A medic who worked by candlelight, his hands shaking but refusing to stop. A boy from the village who shared his last loaf of bread with strangers in uniform. These small acts, stitched together, became the fabric of victory. They reminded me that war is not won by might alone, but by compassion, by endurance, by the human spirit refusing to bend. Yet every advance was paid for dearly. I can still see the faces of friends who never lived to witness those turning points. Their absence was the price of every inch of ground we gained. The closer victories seemed, the heavier the losses felt. We would look at one another in the quiet moments and know, if peace did come, it would be peace bought with their lives. That realization made every breath feel sacred, every heartbeat a gift borrowed from those who had given theirs away. There was one night, in the flicker of a lantern, that I wrote your grandmother words that came from the deepest part of me. I wrote, "My love, I feel the tide is turning, the darkness has not lifted, but I see cracks where the light leaks through. If I do not return, promise me you will tell our children that their father believed in a world better than this, and that he marched every mile not out of duty alone, but out of love, for you, for them, for all that is good in this life." I sealed that letter with trembling hands, unsure if it would reach her, but certain it carried the truth of my heart. It was not just our battalion, nor our nation, that turned the tide. It was the unity of many men and women across countries, strangers who became allies, people who had nothing in common except a shared desire for peace. That unity was a lesson I carried long after the war. When humanity stands together, no darkness can last forever. That is a truth I want you to carry even in your own life. Alone, the world may feel unbearable. Together, we can face anything. The turning points were clearest when we entered towns long held in chains and saw the faces of the liberated. I will never forget the tears of a mother clutching her child as we marched through the streets. She said no words, only pressed her hand to her heart as if to say, "You have given me back my world." In those moments, the miles, the hunger, the wounds, all of it seemed worthwhile. To give another human being back their freedom is the closest thing to touching eternity. Even in victory, there was no celebration. We were too tired, too aware of the cost, but there was resolve, a quiet, unshakable promise within each of us that we would see this through to the very end. We had glimpsed the possibility of peace, and once glimpsed, it could never be forgotten. The thought of home became more real, more urgent. I began to imagine the sound of my children's laughter, the feel of your grandmother's hand in mine, the simple joy of bread on the table. Those dreams carried me more than any command or order. Looking back, I realize the turning points of war were not just military victories, they were spiritual ones. They taught me that despair is never final, that even in the darkest winters, spring waits just beyond. They taught me that history is not written only in grand speeches or signed treaties, but in the steps of weary men who refused to stop walking, in the prayers whispered by women in darkened kitchens, in the courage of children who dare to smile despite the bombs overhead. These are the true turning points, the ones that shape not only wars, but lives. Every time I think of those days, I am struck not only by the sorrow, but by the gratitude of survival. Why did I live when others did not? That question haunted me for years. But as I grew older, I realized the answer was not for me to know. My task was not to question survival, but to honor it, to live a life worthy of those who could not. That is why I share these words with you now. The lessons of those turning points are not just for me, they are for you, for anyone who chooses to listen. So when I tell you about the turning points of war, I am not only speaking of battles and strategies. I am speaking of the turning points of the soul, the moment despair gives way to hope, fear to courage, darkness to light. These are the moments that matter most in war and in life. My dear grandchild, whatever battles you face, remember this: the tide can always turn. Hold on long enough, keep walking far enough, believe deeply enough, and you will find that the world can change, that hearts can heal, and that even in the darkest night, dawn is never far away. Peace did not arrive with the suddenness of a trumpet or the dramatic fall of an empire. No, it crept in slowly, like the first light of dawn easing over a weary horizon. After years of thunderous gunfire and endless marches, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, as if it could break at any moment. We did not dare believe it at first. Could it be true? Could the world truly be setting down its weapons? Every soldier I knew carried that question in his heart. Long before the official announcements, whispers reached our ears. A captured newspaper, a radio broadcast faint and crackling, the murmured words of villagers, "It is ending, soon it will be over." Each rumor set our hearts aflame, but we guarded that fire carefully. Hope can lift a man higher than wings, but it can also shatter him if betrayed. We waited, patient and cautious, as the road stretched on before us. I remember a letter from your grandmother around that time. Her words carried a different tone, lighter, brighter, as if she too could feel the turning of the world. She wrote, "When you return, we will plant a tree in the yard, so its roots will grow as strong as our love, and its branches will reach as high as our dreams." That image stayed with me on every step of the march. I began to picture the tree before I pictured the war, and that simple vision, a sapling in a soil of peace, gave me more strength than any weapon ever could. The world itself seemed to sense the nearing of peace. Battles grew less frequent. The long marches became less urgent. The fields that once echoed with gunfire now echoed with birdsong. I will never forget the first morning I awoke to silence so complete it felt louder than war itself. I lay there, staring at the pale sky, realizing I was alive to hear nothing at all. That silence was a gift. It was the sound of possibility. As we moved through towns newly liberated, I saw faces transform before my eyes. Eyes that had been hollow with fear began to shine with hope. Mothers clutched their children without looking over their shoulders. Old men stood straighter, as if the weight of oppression had fallen from their backs. These moments were the true victories, not the captured flags, nor the signed documents, but the return of dignity to the human soul. In those faces, I saw the world healing, one expression at a time. For soldiers, the road to peace was not only about the world ending its battles, but about beginning the journey home. Each step carried us closer to the lives we had left behind. I began to imagine walking the familiar streets of my town, hearing church bells not as warnings but as calls to worship, feeling the warmth of bread fresh from the oven. I dreamed of holding your grandmother's hand, of hearing the laughter of children in the yard. Those dreams became as real to me as the ground beneath my feet. Yet peace does not erase memory. As we walked toward home, we carried the shadows of all we had seen. The faces of the fallen walked beside us. The cries of the wounded echoed still in our hearts. Peace is not a forgetting, it is a bearing. And so, with every mile, I learned that true peace is not the absence of war, but the courage to live fully despite its scars. That is what I want you to remember, my dear. Do not expect life to be free of sorrow. Expect instead that joy can still bloom in the soil of sorrow. The day I returned home remains etched in my soul. The train hissed to a halt, the doors opened, and the platform overflowed with families holding flowers, waving flags, crying out names. Among them I saw her, your grandmother, her face wet with tears, her arms outstretched. I dropped my pack and ran to her as though the world itself depended on that embrace. In that moment, the war ended for me, not in treaties, not in speeches, but in the simple warmth of being held again by the one I loved. True to her letter, we planted that tree, a small sapling, its roots delicate but determined, its leaves trembling in the breeze. As I pressed the soil round its base, I thought of all the friends who had not returned, of the countless lives forever changed. That tree became more than wood and leaf. It became a living monument to endurance, to love, to the promise of new beginnings. And in its shade I often sat and wrote letters, not of war, but of peace. What I learned in those first years after the war was that peace is fragile yet powerful. It must be nurtured like that tree, watered with kindness, protected with patience. Peace is not passive. It is an active choice made every day to forgive instead of hate, to build instead of destroy, to speak instead of silence. These are the choices that turn swords into plowshares, that make the world worth living in again. And so, as I speak to you now, my grandchild, I ask you to cherish peace in your own life. You may never march through battlefields, but you will face wars of your own, within your heart, within your community, within the struggles of this world. Remember that peace begins not in governments, but in people, in you, in how you choose to love, to forgive, to endure. That is the wisdom I carried home from those long years away, that peace is not a gift we wait for, but a seed we plant and tend ourselves. The road to peace did not end when I stepped off that train. It continues still through every act of love I share, every story I tell, every lesson I pass down to you. My journey is not only mine, it is part of yours now. Take it, walk it, and carry the torch of peace into your own days. For though wars may end on paper, the real victory is when the hearts of people learn to live in harmony. That is the road I began so long ago, and it is the road I now ask you to continue. As I sit here now, an old man with more years behind me than ahead, I find myself walking again through the roads of memory. Some are bright with joy, others dark with sorrow, but together they weave the fabric of my life. And as I reflect on all that has passed, the battles, the losses, the laughter, the homecomings, I cannot help but think of the future, not mine, but yours. For every generation must carry forward what the last one has learned, or else the lessons fade like footprints in the rain. You may wonder why I tell you these stories at such length. Why speak of pain, of hardship, of war? It is not to burden you, my dear grandchild, but to gift you something precious. Memory, when shared, becomes wisdom. The past is not a chain to bind you, but a lantern to guide you. I carry the light of those who never returned, and it is my duty to pass that flame to you. That, I believe, is how we honor the fallen, not with monuments of stone alone, but by living lives of meaning and purpose. Peace may seem natural to you, like the air you breathe, but I tell you, it is fragile. It is not the default state of the world. It is built brick by brick through choices of kindness, patience, and restraint. I have seen how quickly it can shatter, how thin the veil truly is between harmony and chaos. Guard it, nurture it, never take it for granted. The moment you assume peace will always be there, you risk losing it. After a life of turmoil and survival, I have come to see that the greatest joys are often the smallest things. A child's laughter, the smell of bread baking, the way sunlight filters through the trees on a quiet afternoon. During the war, I dreamed of these simple gifts. Now, in peace, I savor them with reverence. Do not wait for loss to teach you the value. Notice them now, treasure them now, and you will live a life richer than any treasure chest of gold. If there is one lesson I wish to carve into your heart, it is this. Love is the only force that survives the ages. Armies rise and fall, nations shift, battles rage and quiet again, but love endures. The love I carried for your grandmother sustained me through the darkest nights. The love for my comrades bound me to them in unbreakable ways, and the love for the family I had not yet met. Children, grandchildren, pulled me forward when my legs threatened to give out. Love is the strongest weapon we have against despair, and it is the greatest legacy you can leave behind. War taught me many things, but perhaps the hardest was forgiveness. It is easy to harden your heart, to see only enemies. But I have looked into the eyes of those we once fought and seen not monsters, but men, tired, frightened, carrying their own burdens. Hatred consumes the vessel that holds it. Forgiveness frees the soul. Do not mistake me. Forgiveness does not erase wrongs, but it releases you from carrying their poison. If you wish to live fully, let go of bitterness and walk forward with an unburdened heart. Life will test you as it tested me. You will face your own battles, perhaps not with rifles and trenches, but with doubt, with failure, with grief. When those moments come, remember this. You are stronger than you believe. Strength is not the absence of pain. It is the choice to rise despite it. Every scar I bear tells a story, not of defeat, but of endurance. Carry your scars proudly, for they mean you have lived, you have fought, and you have overcome. When your grandmother and I planted that tree upon my return, we did not know how tall it would grow, how wide its branches would spread. But we planted it anyway, in faith. That is what life is about. Planting seeds you may never see fully bloom. Your choices today ripple outward into the world of tomorrow. Plant seeds of kindness, of courage, of wisdom. Even if you do not live to see their harvest, others will sit in the shade of the trees you plant. You live in a time I once only dreamed of, free, abundant, filled with opportunity. But freedom is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. Many gave their lives to secure it. To honor them, you must live in such a way that your freedom does not become wasteful or careless. Use it to create, to uplift, to speak truth, to help those who cannot help themselves, That is how freedom remains alive, through action, not through complacency. As age weaves its lines into my face and slows my steps, I find myself grateful not for what I have accomplished, but for what I have learned. Wisdom is not knowledge alone. It is knowledge tested by time, filtered through failure, and softened by compassion. I tell you these things not because I am wiser than you, but because I have walked longer. Take what resonates, leave what does not. But know this, wisdom is a compass. It will not always tell you the easiest path, but it will point you toward the truest one. I believe in you. I believe in your generation. I have seen the darkness humanity is capable of, but I have also seen its light. And the light, though sometimes fragile, always endures. You carry within you the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Do not doubt that. When you are tempted to despair, remember the long marches we walked, the hardships we endured, and the victories we claimed against impossible odds. If we could emerge into peace from such depths, so too can you overcome whatever storms life brings. As I look toward the horizon of my own life, I do not fear the end, for I know that my story lives on in you. My battles, my loves, my losses, my hopes, they are yours to carry forward. And that, my dear grandchild, is the greatest comfort of all. When you walk into your future, remember my words, not as heavy chains, but as guiding stars. Live with courage, love deeply, forgive freely, and plant seeds of peace wherever you go. For one day, you too will sit where I sit now, reflecting on a life lived. And when that day comes, I hope you will smile and say, I carried the torch, and I passed it on.